The studio lights were bright, too bright. They made people sweat even if they weren't nervous. But Sylvester Stallone wasn't nervous. He sat back in his chair, legs apart, shoulders relaxed. He was waiting. He had done this kind of thing before. The audience whispered to each other, excited. Some held their phones up, ready to record. They had a feeling something big was about to happen. Across from Stallone sat Chase Walker. Chase was a TV host. He was always dressed in fancy suits and knew how to make his guests uncomfortable. He liked asking tricky questions that made people look bad. He had interviewed politicians, actors, and famous people before. He always managed to trap them in their own words. But Stallone? That was something new. Chase leaned forward with a smirk. He had a plan. He was going to make Stallone look outdated, like a relic of the past. He started talking in his smooth, practiced voice. "Mr. Stallone," Chase said, "you have always been known as a symbol of toughness. But don't you think that kind of masculinity is old-fashioned? Shouldn't we change what it means to be strong so that everyone feels included?" Some people in the audience chuckled. Others nodded. These were Chase's fans, people who liked to see him make his guests uncomfortable. Stallone blinked slowly. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Are you asking if being tough is a bad thing now?" Stallone's voice was calm but firm. Chase grinned. He thought he had him. "Well," he said, "I think we're past the era where men solve problems with their fists. Don't you think the world has moved on from that?" Silence. The kind that stretched so long that people shifted in their seats. Stallone scratched his chin. Then he laughed. Not a small chuckle, a deep, full laugh. The kind that fills a room. "You're serious?" he said. "You think being tough is a problem?" Chase adjusted his tie. "I think toughness can be a bad thing when it stops people from being open about their feelings." Stallone nodded, thinking for a moment. Then he leaned back, stretching his arms across the back of his chair. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice low and steady. "If someone broke into your house tonight, would you want a tough person there to protect you? Or would you want someone who just wants to talk about their feelings?" The audience gasped. A few clapped. Chase opened his mouth, but Stallone wasn't finished. "Toughness isn't about yelling or punching walls," Stallone continued. "It's about standing strong when life knocks you down. It's about protecting your family. It's about discipline, respect, and hard work. If you think the world doesn't need that anymore, well, I don't know what world you're living in." Chase forced a small laugh, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He hadn't expected Stallone to fight back so quickly. But he wasn't ready to give up just yet. "Okay," Chase said, shifting in his seat. "But don't you think Hollywood, your own movies, glorify violence? Do you think they make people believe that fighting is the only way to solve problems?" Stallone didn't even pause. "Hollywood glorifies a lot of things," he said. "Have you ever seen a movie where someone saves the world by filling out paperwork?" The audience laughed. This time it was real laughter. Even some of Chase's crew members smiled. But Chase wasn't finished. He still had more tricks. Stallone, though, he was just getting started. Chase straightened his posture. He flipped through his notes, looking for the perfect comeback. "Let's talk about influence," Chase said. "You've played a lot of tough guys in movies. Guys who use their fists, their weapons, their brute strength. Don't you think it's time to show a different kind of hero? One who solves problems without violence?" Stallone smirked. He sat up, rolling his shoulders like a boxer getting ready for the next round. "First of all," Stallone said, "I make movies. Movies aren't real. You know that, right?" He raised an eyebrow. "Last time I checked, I never actually fought Apollo Creed for 15 rounds. I never actually took down an entire army with a bandana and a knife. I never actually ran up those steps in Philly and magically fixed people's problems by myself." A few people in the crowd chuckled. Chase stayed firm. "Sure, but movies shape culture. Kids grow up watching Rambo and Rocky. Don't you think we should be giving them heroes who solve problems without violence?" Stallone let out a deep breath. "Have you ever seen Rocky?" he asked. "That whole movie was about getting back up when life knocks you down. It wasn't about beating people up. It was about heart. It was about perseverance." He shrugged. "And Rambo? That guy just wanted to be left alone. If people had just let him walk through town, none of that would have happened." The audience clapped louder this time. Chase's jaw clenched. He could feel control slipping away. So he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Okay, fair enough," he said. "But let's talk about real life. Right now, people are questioning what it means to be a man. Some say your version of toughness, the old school kind where men don't show weakness, is actually a problem. That it creates more division than unity. What do you say to that?" Stallone let the question hang in the air. He tapped his fingers on the armrest, his eyes locked onto Chase. "You ever met a firefighter?" he asked. Chase blinked. "What? A firefighter?" Stallone repeated. "A cop. A soldier. Or even a single mom working 2 jobs just to put food on the table. Have you ever talked to those people?" Chase didn't answer. "You think toughness is their problem?" Stallone shook his head. "No, man. Their toughness is what keeps the world running. The problem isn't toughness. The problem is people acting like strength is bad. Weakness isn't something to be proud of. Strength, with control, is what keeps people safe." Somewhere in the back, someone let out a low whistle. The energy in the room had changed. Chase was losing his grip. "But what about—" Chase started. Stallone raised a hand, stopping him. Not in an aggressive way, just enough to make it clear he wasn't finished. "You want to know the real problem?" Stallone asked. He leaned forward. "It's not tough. It's people sitting in comfortable chairs in safe studios talking about toughness like it's bad. Meanwhile, they live in a world that is protected by tough people." He looked Chase up and down. "You sit here in your nice suit with your scripted questions trying to tell me what's old-fashioned. But let me tell you something. If the world ever really falls apart, if things get bad, you're going to be really glad there are still guys like me around." Silence. Deep, heavy silence. Chase swallowed. He had another question lined up. Another way to take back control. But the audience had changed. They weren't nodding with him anymore. They were waiting for Stallone's next words. And Stallone? He wasn't stopping anytime soon. Chase tried to force a smile, but he was struggling to keep his composure. The interview was going in a direction he hadn't expected, and he knew he needed to regain control before things got completely out of hand. "I hear you, I do," he said, trying to sound measured and calm. His voice was steady, but inside he was starting to feel a little uneasy. "But let's be honest. There's a big difference between being strong and refusing to change. A lot of people would say that your way of thinking, this old-fashioned mindset, is holding us back. Don't you think it's time to move forward?" Stallone took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. His gaze remained steady, and there was a calmness to him that surprised Chase. He could have made another joke, another sharp one-liner like he had in previous interviews, but instead, his tone shifted. It was as if he was speaking from a place of deep reflection. "Have you ever seen a building being torn down?" Stallone asked, his voice quiet, almost like he was making a point in the middle of a lesson. Chase blinked in confusion. "What? A demolition? Have you ever watched one?" Stallone nodded, and the audience seemed to hold their breath. "Yeah, I've seen one," Chase replied hesitantly. "I suppose?" Stallone nodded again, and his words carried more weight as he continued. "It takes just a few seconds to bring it down. A few charges, a button press, and boom. It's gone. But you ever seen one being built?" Chase paused. "Built?" He hesitated, still not entirely sure where Stallone was going with this. Stallone smiled slightly, his voice calm. "It takes years. Years, brick by brick, steel by steel. Men working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it can hold up. The people with the detonators, they don't care about that. They don't think about the work, the sweat, the risk, the people who put in everything to build that structure. They just want to see it come crashing down." The audience fell quiet, fully focused on what Stallone was saying. Chase was speechless for a moment. The metaphor was powerful, and it seemed like the crowd could feel the weight of his words. Chase didn't know how to respond. Stallone continued, his tone still calm but with a sense of purpose. "You say to move forward," he said, looking directly at Chase, "but moving forward isn't always the right way. Sometimes, people get so caught up in change that they don't stop to think about what they're tearing down. They don't stop to ask if what they're breaking is worth keeping." Chase's mind was racing. He had come into this interview thinking it would be easy. He had prepared for Stallone to crack under pressure, to play along with the questions. But instead, Stallone was turning everything around, making Chase question his own assumptions. And worse, the audience seemed to agree with him. Chase couldn't help but feel that the tables were turning in a way he hadn't anticipated. Finally, Chase broke the silence, forcing a chuckle to hide the discomfort he was feeling. "That's an interesting perspective," he said, trying to keep his composure. "But let's be real. Society has changed. We don't live in the same world you did when you made Rocky. People are more aware now. We think about gender roles, systemic issues. We're thinking critically about things." "Thinking critically?" Stallone interrupted, raising an eyebrow. His voice wasn't angry, but it was direct. "Or just criticizing?" The room erupted in noise. Some people in the audience clapped, others gasped in surprise. Even Chase's own camera crew looked stunned. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This had become a full-on confrontation. and Chase wasn't prepared for it. He held up his hands in an attempt to calm things down. Okay, he said, trying to regain control of the moment. Let me ask you this. If being tough is so important, then why do so many people push back against it? Why do so many people feel like it's outdated? Stallone let the question hang in the air for a beat before leaning in slightly, his voice lowering as if he were about to reveal a secret. Because, he said slowly, weak people don't like being reminded that they're weak. The crowd went wild. Some stood up, applauding, while others simply sat there, stunned by what Stallone had said. Chase was left speechless. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was too stunned to respond. The power of what Stallone had said was undeniable. The truth of his words hung in the air, and Chase had no comeback. Stallone let the reaction die down before sitting back in his chair. His tone remained calm, almost like he was giving advice. Look, he said, his voice steady, I'm not saying that everyone needs to be some kind of superhero. But life is going to throw punches whether you like it or not. And when it does, the world isn't going to care about your feelings. It's not going to care about your opinions or your views. The world is going to ask you one question. Can you take the hit and keep moving forward? Chase didn't know how to respond. His mind was racing, but he couldn't find the words. He was speechless. The energy in the room had completely shifted. Stallone had turned the conversation into something bigger, something that reached beyond just the two of them. The audience wasn't just listening to a famous actor anymore. They were listening to someone who was talking about something deeper, something real. Outside the studio, something even bigger was starting to happen. As soon as the interview ended, Chase barely managed to keep his professional smile intact. The cameras cut, but Stallone? He simply stood, stretched his shoulders, and gave the audience a small wave before walking off the set like nothing had happened. There was no drama, no over-the-top gesture. Just a man who had said what he believed and moved on. Backstage, producers were scrambling to deal with the fallout. Chase's earpiece buzzed with frantic voices. That didn't go as planned, one producer said. Social media is already picking it up. We need to cut the controversial parts before we post it online. But it was too late. Someone from the live audience had already uploaded clips of the interview, and within minutes, the internet was on fire. Stallone body slams TV host. Stallone destroys woke media in live debate. The video spread like wildfire. People shared it on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. It jumped from one platform to another, picking up speed with every passing second. Within a few hours, the clip was trending #1. People were clipping the best moments, turning it into reaction memes, and even adding slow-motion replays and dramatic background music. The internet had decided this was something big. The comments came pouring in and they were everywhere. I don't even like Stallone's movies, but this was incredible, one person wrote. He said what everyone's been thinking but was too scared to say. Another comment read, notice how the host had nothing when Stallone turned the tables. Classic. But of course, the backlash didn't take long to follow. Critics were quick to call Stallone out, accusing him of clinging to outdated ideas. Just another aging celebrity stuck in the past, one comment read. Toxic masculinity at its finest? Another person argued, can we stop pretending that Stallone is some kind of intellectual? He's just an actor. Despite the criticism, the video continued to spread. People couldn't stop talking about it, and it wasn't just on social media. The interview was discussed on morning shows, podcasts, and news segments. It became the topic of conversation everywhere. Some people saw it as a wake-up call. Others dismissed it as a manufactured controversy. But one thing was clear, Stallone had sparked something. On one side, people were saying that Stallone had exposed the hypocrisy of modern media. They argued that TV hosts like Chase had an agenda, and when someone like Stallone stood up for themselves, the media freaked out. They expected celebrities to agree with their views, but when someone pushed back, they didn't know how to handle it. On the other side, critics said Stallone was just another rich actor who didn't understand the struggles of everyday people. It's easy to preach toughness when you're living in a mansion, one comment said. He has no idea what real life is like. But then something unexpected started happening. People who actually knew what toughness looked like started speaking up. Firefighters, police officers, military veterans, factory workers, construction crews, and single moms began sharing their thoughts. A retired Marine posted a Facebook message that went viral. Stallone gets it, he wrote. Strength isn't about being a bully. It's about standing up when life knocks you down. We need more of that. A mother from Oklahoma shared a video that went viral too. I raised 3 boys on my own. If I hadn't been tough, they wouldn't have eaten. Don't tell me strength is a bad thing, she said, her voice firm but full of conviction. Even a quiet clip of an older man at a gas station went viral. He was watching the interview on his phone, shaking his head. These kids don't know what real struggle is, he said. They think life's about debating nonsense on TV. Stallone, he understands real life. Meanwhile, Chase stayed quiet. His network tried to push other stories to move the attention away, but nothing worked. The conversation was stuck on one question. Why did a Hollywood actor have more common sense than a professional journalist? It wasn't just about the interview anymore. It wasn't even about Stallone or Chase anymore. The real question was much bigger. People started asking, had modern society really become too soft? Were people so afraid of real strength that they tried to pretend it didn't matter? Was the media controlling what people thought, or were they simply reflecting what society had become? This question began to spread like wildfire. It wasn't just an online debate anymore. It was becoming something that people were talking about at home, at work, at dinner tables. People weren't just watching the interview. They were thinking about it, discussing it, and questioning things they had never questioned before. Parents began talking about how to teach their kids discipline instead of giving them everything they wanted. Workers started pushing themselves harder, trying to stand up to life's challenges instead of complaining about them. It wasn't about Stallone telling them what to do. It was about realizing that toughness wasn't just about being tough for the sake of it. It was about being strong when life gets hard, when things don't go your way. In the end, the conversation wasn't about who won or lost in the interview. It wasn't about Chase or Stallone. It was about a deeper realization. It was about the world forgetting what real strength meant, and one man reminding everyone. Stallone didn't need to make a big speech or declare a victory. His words spoke for themselves. And as the dust settled, people had to ask themselves, what kind of strength do they really value? Is it the kind of strength that falls apart the moment it's challenged, or the kind that stands firm even when it's tough? Because in the end, real strength isn't about muscles. It's about who you are when no one's watching. And that is the lesson people took away from Stallone's words, long after the cameras were turned off and the debate had ended. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world, and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.